Starting today, I'll be living with my parents.
Out of nowhere, Ned said this. It wasn't just him. His parents also looked at me with smug faces.
If you oppose this, Ned will divorce you.
They had victorious expressions. I was just astonished. They don't understand anything. It can't be helped. I'll have to tell them the truth. I'm Cindy Manning, and I'm just an office worker. I'm 26. I only married Ned, who works at the same company, at the end of last year. We currently live in an apartment, but we had a goal to eventually buy a new detached house. Ned is a typical domineering husband who started to act all high and mighty as soon as we got married. He doesn't help with the housework at all. His clothes are scattered all around the room, and he leaves beer cans on the table just like that. He just doesn't do anything. During our courtship, he seemed like a completely normal man, so I had let my guard down.
Now that we're married, I want to have kids.
On a certain holiday, Ned said this while drinking a beer. Honestly, I'm hesitant about having children with Ned. Since he won't help with childcare, the burden will increase, and if that happens, I would have no choice but to quit my job. Right now, my only stress relief is chatting with friends at work. If I lose that too, I don't know what I would do.
We're going to buy a house anyway. Having a big family is more fun, right?
Maybe. Ned's child. Maybe he would be a self-centered child, just like Ned. I shuddered and shook my head. Ned continued to talk happily, not paying any attention to my reaction.
The location has good access and is a brand new house. It's the best.
Buying a house was something we promised before we got married. Ned said he would manage somehow with his income, but in reality, he was also relying on mine. The two of us continue to work together to barely make it possible to repay the mortgage. For that reason, I cannot quit my job. Even so, a child. It's just impossible. How about we wait to have children until our life settles down a bit?
What did you say?
Ned turned his face toward me, flushed red from the beer. Raising a child while working seems difficult for me right now.
Come on, look at other wives. They all work while managing childcare. It's not like you can't do it.
Other people are other people. Besides, those people take maternity leave and don't work until their child can go to kindergarten.
Enough,
Ned said dismissively.
You just don't want kids, right? I get it. You're a cold woman. There's no way you could love a child.
That's not it.
Divorce. I can't do this with you. Bring me the divorce papers.
Ned created a scene unilaterally, not listening to what I had to say. Divorce was a word Ned often used when drunk. Of course, he probably wasn't serious about splitting up. He knew that saying that would trouble me. That's why he used those words. After Ned fell asleep, I began to clean up the beer and snack dishes he had scattered around. A cold woman. I was more shocked by those words than by the talk of divorce. If my husband weren't Ned, I would have considered having children. Ned always made me out to be the bad guy and didn't think twice about his own actions. What's this about bringing the divorce papers? Tears slipped from my eyes as I muttered. We had both contributed money for the down payment on the house. I was in charge of managing that money. Huh? At one point, when I checked the amount, a large sum was missing. I panicked. Why? Hey, Ned. I told Ned about the money issue. Since I had nothing to hide, I could tell him the truth boldly. Meanwhile, Ned's gaze was restless. After darting around the room, he finally spoke up.
It can't be helped. I suddenly needed it.
But don't just take the money without asking. I was angry, but Ned just sulked like a schoolboy scolded by his teacher. Upon further discussion, it turned out that he had been invited by a colleague to drink, and he ended up needing money because he had spent it on a woman at the bar. Falling for a woman at a bar like that?
Well, she was kind and attractive, unlike you.
Is it my fault? I was dumbfounded. Suddenly, Ned had the face of a victim.
You used to be pretty before we got married, but you stopped dressing up as soon as we got married. I'm disappointed.
Ned said regretfully. I trembled with anger. The reason I stopped dressing up is because I'm busy with housework and work. If Ned would help out even a little with the housework and we had more leeway in our lives, of course I would want to dress up. In the end, the money that was lacking was compensated by humbly asking relatives for help. I couldn't understand why I had to struggle so much. The day came when we were finally moving to our new house. As I was packing, my in-laws arrived. Honestly, it was difficult to deal with them amidst the busy packing, but Ned was in a good mood.
By the way, I haven't told Cindy yet.
What? I had a bad feeling. My in-laws were grinning at me.
Starting today, I'll be living with my parents.
What? I hadn't heard such a thing. No, to be correct, I was the only one who hadn't been told. My in-laws said with triumphant expressions,
If you oppose this, Ned will divorce you.
That's how it is. You have no right to refuse.
I see. I was astounded. I couldn't find the words to respond immediately. Ned has a childish bad habit. He keeps quiet about things that would get him scolded if mentioned beforehand, gaining allies first or declaring them after the fact. This time it was probably the same pattern. They don't understand anything, I thought. It's about time I tell them the truth. I opened my mouth. What? I'm single, though.
What?
It wasn't just Ned. My in-laws were also stunned. No wonder. I had kept the truth hidden until this moment. In fact, Ned and I had already been divorced. The reason I stayed in this house was to save up the money I needed to live on my own. I have been gradually saving money from my monthly salary for life after divorce. Soon I had saved enough money, and above all, I didn't want to live with my in-laws. I decided it was the right time to speak up. Ned, do you remember what happened recently?
Recently?
He didn't seem to remember. I sighed as I spoke. The day you made a fuss about the divorce papers while drunk. You actually brought out the divorce papers and signed them in front of me.
No way.
Ned turned pale. It was exactly that. I had stored the divorce papers signed by Ned. Of course, my name was also filled in.
Wait, you haven't submitted them yet, right?
No, they've already been accepted, so I'm single and I have nothing to do with you guys. I said with a cheerful smile. Ned stepped back.
Ned, why did you bring out divorce papers?
It was to teach her how grateful she should be for me. I wasn't serious.
Ned's voice trembled under his mother's accusing tone.
Even so, there were other ways to handle it.
There weren't, I asserted. As I deepened my disdain for how self-centered this family was, I continued speaking. I'm not grateful to Mr. Ned at all. It was his own decision to buy a house, and I felt a heat around my eyes for a moment. I remembered all of Ned's words. Cold woman, disappointed because I stopped dressing up. I was the one who was disappointed. Before we got married, he seemed to be considerate, but as soon as we married, he only criticized me. He wouldn't help with the housework and just kept drinking.
Can a man do housework?
Ned shouted. It was a typical Ned phrase. I turned to my mother-in-law Jane and asked, Do you do all the housework alone? Does your husband not help at all?
Yes, he does take out the trash and carries heavy things.
Mom!
Ned's voice turned almost to a scream. My father-in-law Dan, looking incredulous, asked Ned,
You've been pushing even the physical labor onto Cindy? I work, so I'm tired at home.
I work too. I said it as if spitting the words out. I work too, and I was tired, but you never cared. A sigh mixed with the end of my sentence. I was so disappointed in Ned. The love we had during our relationship was nowhere to be found now. I can confidently say that I can leave Ned. I remembered something just then. Before I leave, I must mention this too. Since I'm no longer part of this house, Ned, you'll be paying the mortgage by yourself.
Cindy.
Ned's face contorted. He understood that he couldn't afford the mortgage without my income. I should probably tell his parents too. I looked towards my in-laws, who were frozen in astonishment, and said, The money I borrowed from relatives as a down payment is also supposed to be repaid by Ned.
What have you done?
Jane expressed her anger, but originally it was Ned who had dipped into the down payment, so it's only natural that he should be the one to repay it. And one more thing, although I no longer feel regret, it would be advantageous in this situation, so I decided to say it. Ned, you were cheating, weren't you?
What are you talking about?
I have evidence. I took out my smartphone. There, a video showed Ned and a female colleague from his company entering an apartment together in a cozy manner. Ned looked at his parents. My in-laws looked at their son with disdain. I'm not interested in this woman. If you want, you can remarry her. But for the hurt you caused to my pride, you will pay me compensation.
Ned?
It's not like that. She's a junior at my company. Cindy, don't say things that could be misunderstood.
It's not a misunderstanding, I said, crossing my arms. Really, how stubborn can Ned be? But I can't afford to lose either. It was predictable that Ned would make excuses. That's why I was prepared for it. I checked with a woman, you know. At first she insisted it wasn't true, but eventually she cried and apologized. I have recorded that conversation.
You're lying.
Ned collapsed to his knees right there. I had acted knowing Ned's character well. There was no oversight. Well then, this is goodbye, Ned. I waved at Ned and his parents and left the apartment. I had packed my belongings into separate boxes just for this moment. I packed the bare minimum into a single cardboard box and left the Manning household. When I returned to my parents' home, they were surprised to see me, but after I explained the situation, they understood.
Ned was such a terrible man. It's only right to leave someone like that.
Yes. Actually, I was a little worried. What if my parents told me that it was just my lack of patience? But those fears were unfounded. My parents said, "You can stay here until you settle down." I decided to take them up on their offer. On the third day at my parents' house, Ned called. I thought as expected, but kept my cool as I answered.
Cindy, come back. You can't just make me buy a house and then decide to leave like this.
Who would allow that? You? If so, I don't need his permission. I endured, didn't I? Like I said before, your terrible words, your laziness to the point where you can't even pick up a piece of trash.
That's a wife's duty,
Ned said resentfully. He doesn't understand, nor is he repentant. I thought that maybe if I put some distance, he might change, but I was wrong. Can I record this conversation? Do you realize that the more you talk, the worse it gets for you?
You.
Ned's voice was filled with anger, but he also realized he had chosen his words poorly. After a moment of silence, the call ended. Since then, I've received frequent calls from Ned and his parents.
Please, cheer up. He may speak harshly, but he loves you. Understand him.
I did love Ned too, until we got married. That's why I married him, and then I regretted it. Ned must think I'm some kind of housemaid. No, if I had been a real housemaid, perhaps he would have shown me a bit more respect. Ned took it for granted that I was his wife and acted however he wanted. I have no intention of returning to Ned.
Don't be so stubborn, Cindy,
Jane said in a coaxing voice. She firmly believes that I still have feelings for Ned. She thinks that if she persuades me, I will return to Ned. I think they're really similar, like a mother, like a son. Both Ned and his mother are full of themselves. However, despite their self-praise, Ned isn't a high earner, nor is he praiseworthy in character. Ned also called me.
Cindy, come back. I apologize for the affair, so won't you come back?
He was desperate. If I didn't return and help pay the mortgage, he has to let go of the newly acquired property. It's not out of love for me that he's frantic. That was clear from his casual words over the phone and the fact that he's been bad-mouthing me to colleagues at work. Then stop talking bad about me at work.
When did I ever do that?
I heard all the rumors at work, you know. You're a pathetic man who talks behind his ex-wife's back because she left him.
What?
Ned seemed unaware, but it was a rumor that had spread throughout the company. At the same time, sympathy for me was growing. If I spoke the truth about our divorce, Ned would be completely isolated. I hadn't talked about it yet, considering it my final consideration. If you keep this up, I'll tell everyone at work about your behavior at home and your affair.
Who would believe what you say?
Ned's voice trembled. I laughed through my nose. Shall we test that right now?
Stop.
In his panic, Ned almost dropped the receiver. There was a flurry of sounds. Satisfied, I ended the call. Even after that, Ned continued to speak ill of me at work. He seemed to be trying to make it so unbearable at work that I'd have no choice but to return to him.
Listen, about my ex-wife? What about her?
It was completely counterproductive. I wasn't lying in our calls. As Ned became more aggressive, colleagues at work began distancing themselves from him. Ned hadn't realized it. He was increasingly isolating himself. Calls to my parents' home continued. I started feeling sorry for my parents. I'll live alone.
Are you sure?
Yes, I've thought of precautions. I reported Ned as a stalker to the police. Due to his persistent and malicious behavior of calling frequently and bad-mouthing me to colleagues, the report was accepted. Ned could no longer approach me. He was eventually fired from his job. His bad-mouthing reached the ears of his boss, who became angry.
What a way to treat a woman who was your wife. I'm disappointed in you. Wait, please.
Ned seemed to have cried and clung to his boss, but it was futile. Burdened with a bad reputation, Ned's prospects for future employment were bleak. His parents also struggled to arrange funds for living with Ned, but they finally reached their limits. The house Ned dreamed of was put up for sale.
You seem happier lately.
Do I? I touched my cheek. After leaving Ned, I was able to have my own time. I started wearing makeup again. Perhaps it was thanks to that. I thought for a moment it was just the makeup, then realized it wasn't. Without having to hear Ned's harsh words, I had become more positive. That change in my mood must have reflected on my face.
Yes, you look more beautiful. It's like you've gained confidence.
Thank you. Encouraged by my colleagues' words, I ignored calls from Dad. Whatever happens to him, it no longer concerns my life. Speaking of calls, once my parents called me.
Your cousin Howard is back at the family home?
Howard is? I muttered that I'd like to see him. Howard and I used to play together a lot as kids. It's typical for boys and girls to drift apart as they grow up, but now that we're adults, maybe we can have a calm conversation. That's what I thought. Next day off, I went to see Howard. Howard?
Cindy, it's been a while. You've really grown up.
So have you. The last time I saw him was when Howard had just become a high school student, but he had grown taller since then and his voice had matured. I was so happy to see him again that I bombarded him with questions. Hey, do you have a girlfriend now?
No, I don't.
After hearing that, I caught myself. Sorry, I shouldn't have brought up that topic.
It's okay. What about you, Cindy?
I was married until not so long ago.
Until not so long ago?
Howard looked puzzled. I told him everything that had happened. At first, Howard just listened quietly, but gradually his expression became stern.
He sounds awful.
I just didn't see it. I said this with a laugh. Somehow I had gotten to the point where I could joke about Ned. It surprised even me. But Howard didn't feel the same way. He frowned and said,
That you were married to someone like that.
Howard? His serious expression somehow made my heart skip a beat. Taking my hand, Howard said,
Cindy, if you're ever going through something tough, tell me. I'm here to listen.
Yeah, I nodded. His words made me inexplicably happy. After that, Howard and I began to meet occasionally. We usually talked over finger food at a bar. I often spoke about my workplace. Sometimes I confided about being scolded by my boss. Howard always listened attentively, never missing a beat. What about you, Howard?
Me?
Howard, the easygoing one, seemed to have little to worry about. However, there were moments when he stared intently at my face. It was embarrassingly awkward, and I said, Don't stare at me like that.
But you've become so beautiful.
He said this with a slight blush on his cheeks. Of course, the redness was due to the alcohol, not me. Just as I was reminding myself of this, Howard spoke in an unusually serious tone.
Cindy, would you consider dating me with marriage in mind?
I started dating Howard. Howard, who was well educated and worked for a well-known company that everyone recognized, was incomparable to Ned in terms of income.
I think you could live comfortably without working, Cindy.
Thank you, but for me, working is part of what makes life fulfilling. I knew how important it was to have time to chat about trivial things with colleagues. Howard understood this well. The only time he ever showed real anger was when a call from Ned came through.
Give it to me,
he said sharply. I handed my smartphone to Howard. In front of me, Howard scolded Ned.
Aren't you ashamed to still be depending on a woman? Especially after how terribly you treated her during your marriage. What do you know?
Ned sounded flustered.
I know enough.
Howard's tone was sharp as he spoke to Ned.
Cindy has always been patient. That's why she endured life with you. You should admit your own faults since even Cindy has given up on you.
With that, he ended the call. Howard was visibly agitated for a while afterward. It was the only time I had ever seen him angry. My only concern was that Ned was reluctant to pay compensation. Howard seemed eager to cut ties with Ned as quickly as possible. He hired a lawyer for me, and that finally led to the payment.
You shouldn't get involved with him anymore,
Howard said, furrowing his brow with concern. I was grateful for his concern, but I responded. But, Howard, if it weren't for Ned, we wouldn't be together now.
Are you saying he was like Cupid? That's a positive way to look at it.
Howard pouted just like a child. He was unconvinced for a while, but eventually sighed and said,
You've always tried hard to be positive and look forward, haven't you? That hasn't changed.
Really?
Yes. That's why I fell in love with you.
With that, Howard hugged me. Not long after, Howard and I got married. In our white-walled house with a garden where we planted roses, I tended to the large garden, thinking if the laughter of our children could fill this house, how wonderful that would be.